The hiatus is over. We've recharged the batteries and just in time for the start of Major League Rugby. Hold on to your hats. The ARN Podcast is back.
Por la historia. 3 puntos para Brasil.
Moonlight!
And a fine day to you all, and a Happy New Year. It's been a little while. Today is Thursday, January 24th. I'm Brian Ray of America's Rugby News. I wish I could tell you that I'm well rested, but there's really no time for sleep in this business. Most of all right now, it's just been these last few weeks, just mayhem. A lot has happened in the rugby world since our last show a month or so back. Today, though, is a special episode dedicated to the start of Major League Rugby season number 2. I have not one, not two, but 3 great guests today. If you are an MLR fan, stick around. You're going to enjoy this one. I mean, who isn't an MLR fan? What a silly thing to say. This is a big year in the Americas, and it's only getting bigger. Next year, we could have a South American Pro League as well. Plans for the Liga Americana are well underway. It looks like one team in Santiago, Chile, one in Asunción, Paraguay, 2 near Montevideo in Uruguay, 2 in Brazil, at least one of those in Sao Paulo, and 2 in Argentina. Tucumán and Cordoba look like the front runners right now. Rosario also interested. So we'll see what happens. And speaking of South America, before we head full steam into MLR, a quick word for Chile, who won the Sudamerica Rugby Sevens series just a couple weeks ago. First place in both the Punta del Este and Viña del Mar Sevens tournaments, and really an impressive performance. Felipe Brangier, the captain, outstanding. You know, they beat an Argentina side that was pretty much full strength at Punta. So they will play in the Las Vegas and Vancouver tournaments coming up in March, and they'll also play in the core qualifiers at Hong Kong, and are probably favorites, or at least one of those, to qualify for core status for next season. Of course, the HSBC 7 series returns this weekend in Hamilton, New Zealand. The USA have had an incredible start to the season. They're in first place overall after 2 tournaments. Here's Madison Hughes.
I think it's about improving those small things. I think if we look back at both those finals, we did things that dropped those games. And fair credit to New Zealand and Fiji, they're both really good teams. We have areas where we're like, okay, if we sharpen up these points, then we think we can get that one extra game. I think we started out really strongly defensively. I think we've always had good attack. We've got such good threats. Perry Baker, Carl Niles, Martin Yosefo, guys who, when you put them one-on-one, they're going to make something happen. But I think the consistency of our defense and just doing that game after game has really been strong so far, and we need to make sure we're continuing to build on that.
And in case you're out of the loop on this one, the top 4 teams from this year's circuit automatically qualify for the 2020 Olympics. So, if the USA keeps playing like this, Canada's chances of getting through the regional qualifier go up exponentially. Remember, it's only North America that they're competing against. So, Canadian fans, if you're not already, get on the USA hype train. Canada is 12th overall right now. They've got some injury problems, but they get 2 key guys back this weekend, Mike Fuailafau and Phil Berna. And there's also 2 new caps in this side, Brock Webster and Cole Davis. So here's head coach Damien McGrath.
Brock Webster has been outstanding since we brought him over to Langford in September. He went with Kingsley down to South America with the 15s to have a look. He came here as a sevens player, and his sevens performances so far have been so good that I really feel I need to take him on one of these trips. Cole Davis has got 15s experience. He's already got test caps. He was outstanding down in South America, and he brings that je ne sais quoi to, you know, he's not predictable. He's strong, he's quick, he's agile, and I'm looking forward to seeing him perform down under. Even more exciting is bringing back 2 players with experience to the group. They've been out, particularly Phil, for such a long time. It's almost 12 months since Phil played. He's an exciting player, and I've got high hopes for him, and I don't want to put too much pressure on him because it's been such a long time out. Mike Fuailafau's been a mainstay of the Sevens team, particularly since I've been here, and to have him back, his experience, he brings that rugby IQ that very few players have on the World Series. So I'm looking forward to seeing him back as well.
Argentina are in 8th spot overall, and I'm interested to see how Bautista Escura does with the Aguares this year, because he was really an outstanding sevens player. So if he's still kind of floating around the periphery for the Aguares and the Pumas, maybe it's best if he concentrates on sevens through the Olympics to kind of help them out a bit. And speaking of the Aguares, they have a brand new captain for this season, Geronimo de la Fuente. He takes over from Pablo Matera, so that's 3 captains in 3 years. Of course, Gus Creevy was the captain for the first 2 seasons. I like De La Fuente. I think he's a good choice. Very consistent player, level-headed inside center. I think the referees will prefer his approach to Creevy, who's a little more animated. The Aguares are actually playing Uruguay tonight in Montevideo, Los Terros, getting ready for the America's Rugby Championship, and we'll talk more about that tournament next week. The Argentina 15 played Chile yesterday. Not really much to talk about there. Not a particularly exciting game. Pretty easy win, as expected for Argentina. Chile trying out an interesting player at number 8. Jaden Lang actually went to Davenport University. He's from Australia. Huge guy. He's 6'1", 265-ish. Pretty mobile. He played prop and center for Davenport, but they're trying him at number 8. I don't think the experiment really worked. Probably going to end up back at, I would say probably prop, but maybe he'll get a look as a crash ball center. We'll see. But enough of that for now. Major League Rugby is the news of the day. 16-week season ahead, and it's going to be extra special for Canadian fans. History will be made on Saturday when the Toronto Arrows play the NOLA Gold in New Orleans. Canada finally with a professional rugby team. And who better to talk about that than one of the big Arrows signings from the offseason? Canadian international Mr. Dan Moor joins us now from Toronto. So thanks for your time, Dan. You got a really big week ahead, a landmark achievement really in Canadian rugby. But it's about minus 15 Celsius. It's about 5 Fahrenheit for those Americans out there. When I look out the window, there's like blowing snow. It's not exactly rugby weather. Does it feel strange to be preparing for a rugby game when it's freezing outside in Canada?
Yeah, it's a good point, Brian. There is a lot of sort of drastic change between the temperatures we'll be going through. I mean, firstly, thank you so much for having me on today and letting me represent the Arrows as we get into our first game here. As you said, there is a drastic change in temperature, but it's just another thing that I think we're looking forward to, the challenge of it, and something that we can try and overcome as a team. We were actually lucky enough to spend the majority of last week out on the West Coast in Victoria with the Canadians Center of Excellence. And so, the change from Victoria to Louisiana will be slightly less than TO to down there, but we'll be looking forward to getting into some of the heat down there and hopefully putting together a great performance.
Right. So, I mean, you guys have been cooped up inside pretty much from the get-go, training in a field house, even down in New York at the Buffalo Bills field house as well. So Victoria would have been your first action outside, really. I mean, does it feel weird to be practicing indoors all the time, especially with you coming back from England, having to kind of switch gears like that?
I think before I was ever went to the West Coast or to England, the Blues had always been training, from early January to prep for our CRC season. So it really wasn't something, that I think the guys aren't familiar with. Maybe it feels a little bit strange, but at the same time, I think we have all the facilities here that we really need to prep for a rugby game, no matter what the conditions are. Being able to go out to the West Coast last week and play outside and play with full dimensions, etc. is I think going to hopefully bode us well for this week, but then furthermore for the rest of the season.
So do you have a regular home base, like where you're training, or are you moving around in different spots? I saw you guys were at, I think it was one of the gyms in Burlington or something, just doing some indoor stuff. But for your main field stuff, do you have a regular field house that you guys are at normally?
Yeah, so I mean, we basically have 2 locations that we really work out of. There's a dome in Burlington at Sherwood Forest Park that we play at on Mondays, and then the rest of the week we're training in the Whitby Dome. So there is a little bit of moving around, but The facilities have been great up to this point, and we have the space and everything we really need to put in the hard yards and get prepared for the season.
I'm looking back at kind of your career for a minute. October 2015, you're playing in the McCormick Cup final with, Bruce Gage and the Bommy Beach, all those guys. And now, 3 years and change later, assuming Mr. Silverthorne throws you in the lineup against New Orleans this coming weekend. So by this time on Sunday, you'll be recovering from the first ever rugby union match involving a Canadian team in a professional competition. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly exciting. I think, that was really what drew me to coming home from overseas to play, was the fact that there's an opportunity in my hometown to play professional rugby, to represent, this city, but also more broadly the province and to a certain degree, the country in terms of the MLR. So incredibly exciting opportunity. And I think if you got to spend, a day in our environment with the Arrows, you would really feel that energy and I'd say appreciation of the opportunity that the boys have in front of us. The fact that you can actually make a living and sort of chase your dream full time is something that wasn't around for all of us for the last number of years. And now that we're kicking off with this fantastic opportunity that we have in front of us, we just want to make the most of it. So it's incredibly exciting and big weekend for the club. So hopefully we can start off on the right foot.
You're right. I mean, you're from Toronto, and most of the team really, there's a sprinkling of accents, but most of the team is Canadian and quite a few, local players. Mike Shepard's from Brampton, Moonlight's from Pickering, and you'll be playing, 4 games at Lamport, which is right down King West in Toronto. I mean, did you ever think that was going to happen so soon?
I think a bunch of guys really hoped it would or sort of dreamed it would. Big credit to Bill Webb and to Mark Winokur for really doing all sorts of work to make this dream a reality for all the players on the team and hopefully rugby fans both across the city and across the province. So it's really to their hard work where the credit should go in terms of making this team actually come to fruition, in a season that rugby fans in Canada can really get behind.
So you personally have kind of an interesting story, and you made some interesting career decisions along the way. And for you, that kind of means more than just rugby wise. You were doing quite well at Birch Hill, working in private equity. And so financially speaking, the whole rugby thing is a bit of a step down. But, you said in other interviews you want to take a shot at the World Cup. You'd been a regular in the team. When you broke in that ARC was at February 2016. You were pretty much a regular through to the World Cup qualifiers in mid-2017. I kind of expected you to turn pro then, but instead you actually went to Oxford. So why did you make that choice at that time? Was it ever in your mind that choosing to go to Oxford might negatively affect your international rugby career?
Yeah, I guess, just firstly, I think, I'm very lucky in the fact that, I have big dreams both for my athletic career and then also professionally when rugby's done. And I think, right now I'm sort of recognizing that there's a time for both. There's certain things that my body can't do in 5 years that it can now. And so now is the time to focus on those rugby and athletic dreams. Part of the draw to Oxford University was one, sort of world-class academics, being able to sort of surround yourself with individuals, that can help you learn a different perspective on the world. I was in a class of just over 300 people, but represented 60 countries around the world. And I think I got a ton of value from just hearing how my classmates view different, business problems or even more broadly sort of world scale problems. But a big draw of Oxford University for me as well was the fantastic rugby program that they have there. There's a lot of Canadian rugby fans wouldn't know it, but UK rugby fans know of the varsity match that's played between Oxford and Cambridge University, really the mecca of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere, played at Twickenham. And the game I was in, there was 30,000 fans watching. And although our season is a bit strange in the fact that it's almost binary on just one game, what is the outcome of that Cambridge game that you play in, the rest of the schedule is full of championship. We played Bristol's championship team in the lead up to the United Cup. You play a couple A-level or A-League teams from the Premiership. So you're playing really good rugby talent week in, week out. And I think that was something that it offered, differently from maybe the West Coast of Canada. I was very lucky to be part of the centralized program with Rugby Canada, which I thought was great. But, to a certain degree, you probably don't play as many games as we would like to in that program. And so I thought, Oxford was that combination of something for my future and an amazing academic experience, but also from a rugby perspective, a really high quality environment that I could continue to develop as a player. And, I think an example of that was Canada played Oxford in the build up to their repechage competition. And, even though some of those players are a little bit younger and have fairly significant academic demands at even an undergrad level, some of the players, still really good footy players. And I think, gave us a good preparation match that helped guys get in the right frame of mind for those more significant tests later on in November.
Speaking of Oxford, kind of a small world out there. Your man Connor Kearns is playing for the San Diego Legion. Are you going to give him a little tour of the city when they come to town in May?
For sure, yeah. Connor's a very good friend of mine, terrific guy and a great rugby player. So, thrilled that he's got an opportunity with San Diego. I think he had some games for them last year and went really well. And it'd be no surprise to me if kicks on again this year and is a major contributor for that team. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to visiting him in San Diego. Hopefully getting a tour of Pacific Beach and sort of seeing what he's been up to, and then when he comes to Toronto, returning the favor. And speaking of the varsity match specifically, I actually watched it again pretty recently. You were wearing 13 in that match. You played a bit of center at Queen's, but all of your Canada caps have come on the wing, and you were a wing at Yorkshire Carnegie. Do you see yourself primarily as a winger, or is there a chance we might see you playing a little bit in the midfield this season? Yeah, I played primarily 13 at Queen's, and played actually quite a bit of 12 and 13 at Oxford. And it's a skill set that I'm trying to add to my repertoire, if you will. But I guess I view myself as a winger with the ability to play some 13 as well. But I sort of leave those decisions up to above my pay grade in terms of in the coach's hands and sort of wherever they think I'll be able to contribute best to the team is where I'm willing to play. So, both for the Arrows or ever at the national team level again, if I get the opportunity, just want to be on the pitch helping out the team as best I can, really.
That's a very diplomatic response. You mentioned the A-League there while you were playing with Oxford. You got to actually play a couple of the Aviva A-League games with Wasps just at the end of that season. What did you think of the standard of rugby?
Yeah, that was actually that was an amazing experience for me. Beyond just being able to suit up a couple times in the A-League, I also got to actually train with the Wasp first team sort of twice a week for 2.5 months or so, and just being able to be in that environment. They were just on the back end of the Lions tour. So I think there've been sort of 6 or 7 guys in their camp. I had just been on with the Lions the year before. So being able to, train with a guy like Elliot Daly, James Haskell, and see how they work on their craft and sort of approach the game on a day-to-day basis was really eye-opening. Because those guys are world-class players, and I argue that we do have a couple of those sort of talents in the Canada setup as well. But to also you see a different angle, I guess, on how they approach their game was really enlightening and something that I really appreciated. So it was an awesome little stint with Wasps.
Right. So then after that, you went to Yorkshire Carnegie. You joined them in late August, played a few games in the championship. Having experienced that training with the Premiership side, how would you compare that with what you saw in the championship?
Yeah, well, I think the A-League is interesting because, depending on the time of year, depending on the injuries on the squads, the sort of level can vary considerably between the different clubs. So I think, a club like Northampton, I believe, has a much deeper player base, and so they're putting together some pretty quality outfits in that A League. Whereas Wasps, had a little bit leaner squad, if you will, and had some injuries towards the end of the season, which is really how my opportunity came up to play with them. I thought A League it's generally geared towards younger players, really fast rugby, really skilled rugby, and lots of guys get an opportunity to sort of throw the ball around and show what they can do to coaches at their prospective Prem club. So that was fantastic rugby, great experience. The championship is obviously, the players are slightly more mature in terms of physical development, and maybe as a result, the tactics are slightly different. But again, I was really impressed with the level when I played in the league. There's some great matches and some really quality players at Yorkshire Carnegie that I was lucky enough to learn from. And basically all the guys at Yorkshire, or vast majority of them, had played in a Prem setup or played in a Pro 14 setup before. So being able to learn from their prior experiences and their knowledge of the game was something that I think has helped me grow as a player.
You mentioned the lean squad of Northampton there. Maybe a quick shout out to Phil McKenzie and his lean squad. So right around when you were signing that deal with Carnegie, actually the Arrows were getting pretty close to sealing up their MLR approval. Did you think about that option at all before joining Carnegie? Like, were you aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd been lucky enough to talk to the owner, Bill Webb, for the better part of the last year, I'd say, and was trying to sort of figure out, what was the best opportunity for me, in terms of putting myself in sort of the shop window for the World Cup. I'm pretty open that that's sort of my personal goal, my personal dream is to be able to represent my country at really what I think is the pinnacle of the sport. And so it was just sort of figuring out where is the best opportunity to keep on developing as a player. And through I was lucky enough to be in one of the week-long camps with Canada in November for their preparation for the November tour. And through conversations with Kingsley Jones and with Mark Winokur and Bill Webb and stuff, you sort of was able to get to the conclusion that I thought, applying my trade on this side of the pond would probably be the best opportunity for me. Be able to have the opportunity to play with guys like Andrew Ferguson, Theo Sauter, Lucas Rumball, that will be in the mix for that World Cup squad moving forward. I hope will be beneficial. So that was really the motivation for the move, and additionally on top of that is just the fact that I have an opportunity to represent my hometown and represent the country more broadly in the MLR. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all the players here to help build something that could be truly special for years to come. So it was kind of two-pronged personally, both the World Cup opportunity, but secondly also being part of what's built here at the Toronto Arrows.
So was that originally part of the plan then when you went to Carnegie, that you were going to stay with them until, I think it was November, December, early December kind of thing, and then switch to the Arrows? Was that the plan from the start?
It wasn't explicitly the plan, I would say. My contract was there until end of December. So there wasn't, there was an opportunity to move on to something else. And, it was a decision and an option that I thought about very, very thoroughly for a number of weeks. Because, credit to Yorkshire Carnegie, I think it's a fantastic club, great environment, really love the coaching staff and the guys. And personally, I was, getting a great opportunity there in the championship. But, I thought for me personally at that point in time, coming back home to be with the Arrows was the best decision.
Were you chumming around with Jake Ilnicki while you were over there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Jake's a fantastic guy, and it was his first season at Yorkshire Carnegie as well. So for us to be able to sort of navigate both Leeds as a city and the club together was something I'm definitely thankful for.
Yeah, I spoke to Nick Savetta in one of the earlier podcasts, and he had actually stayed with Jake while they were playing together in Newcastle, and he commented on how Jake's eating routine is very boring, so maybe you gave him some cooking tips or something before you left. But so the World Cup is still your goal. So are you going to be doing any work like you're back in Toronto, which of course is this mecca of the financial industry in Canada. Are you going to be doing any work in that at all while you're there, or are you just going to be concentrating on rugby from now through to the World Cup?
Yeah, I'm just going to be focused on rugby primarily. I really want to pour everything I possibly can into continuing to get better as a player over the next 9 months, 10 months or so. But I also have a skill set that I built in a couple years of finance experience in downtown Toronto, and then also with an MBA from Oxford. And so I'm going to be using some of those skills to help the Arrows think about, how do we actually build a professional franchise here? How do we get a sustainable business, creating a sustainable business? I think that's one thing that's, as players or I'm hoping to help drive that is sort of an owner's mentality amongst the players group, because, at the end of the day, we got to make sure that this is a sustainable business if we want professional rugby to last in Canada. I think there's some early signs, if you look at the talent of a guy like Bill Webb or Mark Winokur, that it's really encouraging. You have some really talented people around this franchise, but again, there's all sorts of risk. And so, I think if we have that kind of talent, but collectively, everybody in the organization is on board to try and drive ticket sales, et cetera, hopefully we can get there to get a sustainable business off the ground.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. When we talk about professionalism in sport, it's more than just, showing up and lifting weights and training. It's all the off-field stuff as well. Maybe we don't sometimes think about that as much. So, the environment as it is right now, it's still very, very new. Does it feel professional? Does it have that professional feel to it right now?
Yeah, for sure. There's obviously, like with any sort of business that you're just getting off the ground, there's, the odd sort of, bump and sort of obstacles that we have to overcome. But I think I really credit the coaching staff and the ownership group here in terms of, how they've approached some of those obstacles and challenges and how we've, overcome them. And we're still tweaking things and finding our way, but for the most part it's been a fantastic environment to be a part of. I think as players we're getting supported tremendously, and so I think we're absolutely thrilled with the program that we've seen in front of us to date, and I think it's only going to get better and stronger and improve on itself. So really, really good early signs. I think there's a great hunger in both the the staff and the ownership to do the right thing from players and make sure that we're trying to maximize the on-field product and the ability to develop different individuals. So I think we have the right attitude, and at least what I've seen in the business world, sometimes that's at least the lion's share of getting where you want to go. So I think culture and attitude definitely tick in the right boxes, and hopefully that'll help us build something that again is sustainable and becomes hopefully a firepower organization in the North American rugby landscape.
You've got a pretty big obstacle playing wise or performance wise right off the bat. 8 games in a row on the road to start the year. That's a pretty hard slog mentally, physically. Talking about the culture and resilience, is there anything you guys are doing differently to prepare for that mentally heading into that, knowing that you're going to be pounding away for these 8 weeks before you get back to home base?
Yeah, I think we know that there's an emphasis on recovery for sure for these next 8 months. Those plane journeys, those being, out of town every weekend is definitely going to be taxing. So, we need to make sure that we're doing the proper sort of body maintenance, looking after ourselves, making sure we're getting the right sleep, hydration, and food, fuel in us to make sure that our bodies can come through in a decent way at the end of those 8 weeks. Because, we have another big 8 games at home where we need bodies and guys to be still standing upright. But from a preparation standpoint, I think there's just again great attitude and culture around big challenge, but something that everybody's excited for. At the end of the day, it is, I guess, a big challenge to go play in all these cities, but you can look at it the other way. Like, what an incredible opportunity. You can play professional rugby in North America. you get the opportunity to go see all these amazing cities in the U.S. in terms of New Orleans, Austin, San Diego, New York. Like, who wouldn't want that? I think it's again, the boys are just looking at the opportunity and super excited for what we have ahead of us. And I think it could really be almost a strength for us, the fact that we get 8 weeks together on the road, to just sort of further solidify those bonds. We have a couple new boys in the mix, and there's no secret. Those road trips when you're in the hotel together 24/7, you definitely get to know each other better than going to your own homes at night. So it could actually be a great thing for our season in terms of us getting together as a team at the beginning of the year, and then hopefully being able to use those tighter bonds for the rest of the season.
Right, you got some, you have some interesting characters on there. Morgan Mitchell, I've been reading up on him, pretty interesting fella, and the South American guys, those guys would be good fun, I'm sure. Have you ever been to New Orleans?
I never have, actually. I'm really looking forward to it. I've read a lot about the city. Obviously, I'll be a little bit heartbroken there with the Saints loss on the weekend, but hopefully we can go down there and sort of experience the city and put together a performance. All
right. Well, I can't let you go without some predictions. So, first year out of the gates, how are the Arrows going to do? Is this team going to make the playoffs?
Put me on the hot seat like that. I think we know that there's a significant challenge in terms of the competition. A lot of really good players on the other teams, a lot of really good teams that have been going into their second year of being in the setup. But obviously our goal is to be a competitive outfit. And we have confidence in ourselves that we'll be able to put a good product on the field. So definitely that's one of our goals, and we're going to be driving towards it. So hopefully, yes.
I feel like Chris Silverthorne has written the manual on that kind of response. Very well rehearsed. All right. Well, thanks again for your time, Dan. Really appreciate it. Best of luck this weekend. Enjoy New Orleans. And we look forward to watching the progress, with great excitement of the Arrows this season.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Brian, and being able to sort of share our perspective my perspective on the Arrows. I really appreciate it. And, everything you've sort of done for America, from a rugby perspective, definitely doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you very much for your efforts and your time.
Well, thanks, Dan. I appreciate those comments. I'm really only here to entertain. Dan Moor, Canada winger, and now Toronto Arrows. And I'll let you in on a secret now. He will be starting in the number 14 jersey for the Arrows on Saturday. Not just the first Arrows game, but it's also the first MLR game of year 2. What an honor for the Arrows to play in that game. What an exciting time to be a rugby fan. You can find Dan on Instagram if that's your thing, dan.ag.moor. And it's really just pictures of him being great. So, if you like feeling envious all the time, have at her. Do what you want. Moving right along, of the returning teams, one I'm very interested in monitoring this season is Austin Elite. There are so many new players and only a few, very small number of returning guys. So, it's kind of like an experiment down there. They had some injury problems before the season last year, kind of struggled. And one of those players was one of their best players, U.S. Eagles hooker Peter Malcolm, who ended up missing the whole campaign, didn't play at all. He's just about ready to make his comeback after months on the sidelines with a knee injury. And he joins us now from the great state of Texas. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. You must be pretty excited to finally get a crack at Major League Rugby after, sitting out the entire season last year.
Yeah, unbelievably excited to finally get involved with playing high-level rugby again. It's been a long 10 months of surgeries and recovery and just spending all my time in the gym. So I'm excited to get to play some rugby again for sure.
So was it a complete ACL reconstruction? Is that what you had?
Yeah, so I fully tore my ACL and had some damage to both my lateral and medial meniscus. So yeah, it was a pretty serious knee surgery.
So how did you actually injure yourself? Was that at the tail end of last year's ARC? Was it in training?
So it was the week I came back from the ARC tour. I probably was guilty of trying to come back from tour a little bit quick. I had the option to take that full week off and thought I could train, and got hurt just non-contact stepping, and then didn't get diagnosed correctly, and then came back after a month and tore straight through it after the third day.
Geez, well, just I don't like hearing that didn't get diagnosed correctly. I was just reading Christian Osberg's post on Twitter there about his hamstring problems. He's finally getting those fixed. So the timing of that whole thing had to be extremely frustrating. You're captain of the selects at the APC, and then you played in both the November tests. So it seemed like you had a whole lot of momentum behind you. That had to be, massively frustrating for you.
It was extremely frustrating at the time, but it's part of doing this as a job. Like, injuries are going to happen. Like, I had been relatively injury-free from the time I started playing rugby when I was 14, even when I was playing football when I was younger. Like, I had never been out for longer than a month before this surgery. So, sports is going to get you eventually if you're going to play sports at like a high level. So, you got to take what you can from it. You learn from it.
So, I mean, what do you do to occupy your time that whole time? Obviously you can't just – can you do line out throws, anything like that? Do you do video analysis? What do you do?
So most of it was rehab focused. I mean, after I was able to move around again, I was in the gym and at rehab probably 3 hours a day for a while there. And that was mostly it, was focusing on the rehab. Like, I trust myself as a rugby player. I know that I'll be able to get back there mentally pretty quickly. It's come back pretty quick while I've been in camp. Still obviously got some rust to knock off as far as like defensively and positioning and stuff like that. But it was really the rehab and the getting strong again that I was really focused on.
So how's the knee now, and when are we going to see you back in the pitch?
The knee is actually feeling great. I was fully cleared for contact for full activity on Friday, this past Friday. And now they're going to work me back in slowly, so I'm just hitting mostly bags and stuff this week, and I'm hoping to be back in by the third game, and then if not the third game, then the fourth game. I felt very good this week, so I think we're going to be pushing it for the third game.
That's good news. Long-term injuries can have a pretty significant effect on body mass. So how is your weight right now? Did you have to build yourself back up to front row size?
I actually didn't have a huge problem keeping my weight on. I think the lowest I got during this whole thing was 229, and I usually like to play at 235. So, I mean, that's not a huge problem. I was lifting pretty much after 2 weeks out from surgery. I was lifting. Pretty much most of that's just to keep my sanity, because sitting on the chair in a chair for hours at a time is just not. It's really not what I'm wired to do. But so the weight thing really wasn't a problem. I've never really had a problem eating a lot either, so it really wasn't that part wasn't really a big deal.
So I mean, I imagine you have to have a little bit extra weight playing hooker. Of course, you're a flanker at Wheeling Jesuit. So who was it who really convinced you to make that switch to hooker? I think you did it right around 2016 with Ohio. Was that right?
Yeah, I had gotten some looks at hooker in USA age grade stuff, but it had mostly been playing flanker still. But when I went to Ohio, the USA had called and talked to our coaches at Ohio and said that they wanted me to switch to hooker. So that's what I did. I mean, that's my goal all along, was to play for the Eagles. So if that was going to be the way I was going to do it at hooker and not at 7, then that was what I was going to do.
Quickly on Wheeling Jesuit, your old teammate Max Lum is at Glendale this year. Do you have any special moves for him planned if you happen to meet in the scrum?
Special moves? No, I just plan to hit him really hard.
That's be some interesting.
I'm excited, really excited for Maxie to be in the league. I mean, I always thought when we were at Jesuit that he was, if not the most talented player on our team, then like we were tied. Like there was a lot of times that I thought he was naturally a better rugby player than me. He's a very good rugby player. I'm excited that he, especially as a U.S.-born talent, U.S.-grown talent, that he's getting a chance to play in a high-level environment.
That'll be good to see. In a very good environment over there at Glendale. You've spoken about the problem of scrummaging American rugby in previous interviews with like Alex Goff. You talked about how much that it helped at Ohio working on it every day, especially with somebody like Jamie McIntosh around. Do you feel the scrums in pro while you were there got better as the season went on?
I think the best scrummaging I did during pro was in the Ohio scrum sessions on Wednesdays. Honestly, the front row we had there was all but one of us either ended up capped or were capped at the time, and one of them was an all-black cap. Like, that's obviously a very high-level cap. So I've never really felt as much pressure in the game as I did during our scrum sessions on Wednesdays in pro.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Fawcett and Demeca's Beach and pretty
Anthony
stacked.
Perry. I mean, Angus McClellan. It was a very serious scrum session every week.
So from what you've been seeing in MLR so far, and maybe what guys like Chris Shade and Mason Peterson have said to you or something, how are the MLR scrums from your view?
They were just really up and down last year. Just a lot of guys' first taste of high-level scrummaging. So, last year I don't think that a lot of teams were super deep in the front row, and I think that has gotten – I mean, everyone's seen the signings this year. You've seen the depth get better all across the board, but especially in the front row where you really need that depth. So I think the quality will come up quite a bit.
So you make a good point with the depth. One of my opinions on it, aside from obviously – as you've said in the past, just not having the quality coming up, through high school and development. But at the top, for me, there seems to be a lot of utility front rowers around American rugby. If you look at the English Premiership, for example, probably 90% of the front rowers are really specialists. But over in America, we've seen guys like Ollie Khalifi, Anthony Perry, Tony Purpura, all playing both sides. Cam Falcon's a hooker one week and a tight head the next. At Austin last year, Chris playing loose head and hooker almost every game. We had Mason playing both sides, Larome White and Brendan Rams with you guys this year. So, that versatility is nice for the team. But when I think of the best scrummaging guys in the USA, I tend to think of guys like Paul Mullen and Paddy Ryan, who play tight head exclusively. Do you think it'd be better if there were more specialists?
And I think that just really gets back to the depth, is that when we have that depth, that'll allow people to be in their best position. Like most of those guys who had to move around simply had to move around because that they had to cover that for their team. They were the next best guy at doing that. That doesn't mean that's necessarily where they belong, but you have to do what you have to do for your team. Like if Shady has to play hooker and loose head in the same game, then that's what he's going to do. But I think with the depth that we're going to have here at Austin and across the league, guys are going to be able to specialize in their one position where they belong. Which, yes, 100%, that will be much better. If you scrum at loose head for an entire season versus having to switch back and forth, that will make you a much better loose head than having to do both.
Do you spend a lot of time working on the set piece on the scrum at training at Austin?
Yes, probably at least 30 to 45 minutes every day. Every day that we're in. On a non-off day, lineouts or scrums will take up at least 30 to 45 minutes of the day.
Well, so that's good to hear. So, you're named in the Eagle squad for the ARC. Are Gary Gold and Dave Hodges and the staff good at keeping in touch while you're, sidelined with long-term injury?
I was really impressed with how well they kept track of me the whole time. Really down to Kevin, the head trainer. Who I was in contact with the most, but I spoke to Dave Hodges probably 3 or 4 times, maybe up to 5, like while I was progressing through the injury, and that really helps as an athlete to know that they're still thinking about you while you're, 5 months into a 9-month recovery. I was kept track of very well. Had a lot of conversations with Kevin. It was good. Very good.
I'm sure that you have kind of, as you rehab, you have your own physical targets and so on. But as far as coming back into the side, Gary, in interviews, he said he's very kind of stats-based, or he likes to have a good grounding in that, right? So did you get specific performance targets for when you come back? A certain number of rucks they want to see you hitting, line-out percentage, that kind of thing?
Well, the line-out percentage is the one that I know from the previous tour, which I believe was 90% or higher, which is just really, if you're going to be a test match hooker, 90% is the very bottom of what you should be hitting as far as your percentage. The rest of it, I believe that's information that I'll get when I get into camp. Having not been into camp for a year, I don't know a lot of the new stats. I really only had 2 games under Coach Gold since I've been in. He was in right before I got hurt, and I was in for 2 games. So I don't know all the stats that he's looking for out of me, but I'm sure that information will be given to me as soon as I'm in camp.
So when you first broke into the Eagle side, I mean, it was really yourself and James Hilterbrand, and then, Big Joe was still kind of a prop / hooker. He wasn't quite zeroed in on hooker just yet. The stocks were relatively thin there. They were even looking at maybe switching Henko to the front row. He had a little bit of time there with Denver. But so now you're coming back and you've got, Dylan Fawcett, your old buddy from Ohio's qualified now. He's been capped several times. Pat Blair is in there. Pat O'Toole, Chad Goff, Alex Forster. Capelli Pifoletti just got called up. Sean McNulty is coming over, and he's either, qualified now or very close on this cumulative residency. So all of a sudden there's a heck of a lot of competition. And that's a nice problem for the coaching staff. How do you feel about suddenly having to contend with another half dozen guys for your spot?
That's exactly how it should be. If we want to become a high-level nation, if we want to become a top 10, top 7 nation, that's the kind of competition that we should have at every position. So, I mean, obviously it's going to make my job a little bit harder to get my spot back, but that is how it should be hard to get a test spot. So, I am happy that my country is starting to produce players and have that many people, that many options in every position. That's only good for us. Now it is gonna make my job more difficult to get back and play well and compete with all of these guys who are a lot of high quality players in that list. But I'm excited for it. That challenge has always pushed me to be a better player, and I'm looking forward to it.
So here at Austin, you're finally going to get a chance to play in this. How's your French coming along? It's Thierry's the GM, Alain's coach. You got Mikhail and Timothy, the halfbacks. Do these guys all eat lunch together and curse everyone out en français?
I don't know, because I still don't speak a lick of French. But everyone pretty much speaks pretty good English. Really, the only problem, it's not really a problem. The only guy who doesn't speak English as well as their native language is our new tight head, Juan. And we have a bunch of Spanish speakers who speak both, so it's really not much of a problem.
Right. You're talking about that. Austin has really completely retooled this year. There's really only about a dozen or so returning. I mean, even yourself kind of counts as a new player. You didn't play last year.
Didn't play 1 minute. So.
I'm interested also in the cultural aspect of this team. You've got, a few South Africans. You got 5 South Americans. You're starting to collect Canadians now. How do you make a team identity and mesh all these different sorts of characters together?
I honestly think it's very easy to create a team identity when everyone is moving here. Everyone is new to a place. Then, the first people you're friends with when you're here are the people on the team. So you all become very tight very quickly. And we all spend a lot of time together. This is a fully professional environment here. We're all in from usually 8:30 until 3. So you spend that much time with people, it's pretty easy to create a culture. Rugby players are going to bond pretty easily. It's not rocket science that we're pretty good at being social. So.
And so you got all these new players from all over the place. The average age of the team is really only, I think it's about 24, might be 25. Yeah. I think, I don't know if Andrew Suniulu is actually planning on playing this year. I know he's just joined the staff, and you got, Penny is the only other guy even at 30. So what's your outlook on this season like? You only had the one preseason match. How long do you think it'll take for the team to really gel on the field, given all the newness and, the youngness of this team?
I really don't think that we're going to have a huge amount of problems gelling. Everyone that's come in has been just extremely professional. Has gone about their work in a very professional way. And it's honestly, trainings have looked unbelievably good for the amount of new guys. Like you said, there's probably 10 guys left from the team last year, and 9, not including me, because I didn't play a minute. So I really don't think there's going to be a huge amount of growing pains. Like, we've brought in most of these guys who we've brought in have played in test matches. Like, they can come into a team to come into a test match team. You have to learn quickly, and we've had 7 weeks. 7 weeks for most of these guys is, that's 5 weeks too long to learn. Like, we're not going to be struggling, I don't think.
So with all these new faces around, from the guys you haven't really seen up close before, which is probably a lot, is there anyone who has maybe surprised you? And I mean, in a good way, like you're looking at them and they're maybe even better than what your first impressions or expectations when they came in.
Somebody I've been really impressed with, and who got here very recently, is Rikus Swart. Young guy, I think he's 22. Was in the Sharks Curry Cup team a couple times. Big man. I think 6'6", 265, and is so impressively explosive off the ground in the lineouts. Like, gives us another really good lineout option in a lineout that's pretty stacked with good lineout options. He's one of the quickest off the grounds in the team, and to moving that quick off the ground at 265 is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I was looking at some footage of him when that signing was announced. He does look like an impressive athlete, and certainly some of the fans in South Africa had piqued their interest that he was headed over. One of the fun kind of tribal elements of rugby is the so-called derby match. Toronto and New York and Boston, when they all started to get going, they've got kind of historic rivalries in other sports. So, and obviously Texas. So we got 2 teams there. Do you guys actually get any more fired up for the games against Houston than you would for, say, a Seattle game? Like, does it really matter? Is there really a rivalry there?
I think it's going to take a couple years of the league before those rivalries really get fired up. Obviously, you want to be the best team in Texas. There's only 2 teams here. I think we might be the only state right now with 2 teams. You want to be the best team in Texas. Now, as far as an actual, real, active rivalry, it's just like the rest of the league. It's going to take years for those to grow. But you're still going to think of it as who's the best in the state.
Yeah, I hear that Dallas is getting a little closer to picking up a franchise, maybe some talk of them actually coming in next season. So maybe down the line, maybe a little, a Lone Star Cup preseason tournament or something like that might be fun or something, but it's certainly very interesting. How does the team feel about the move to Del Diamond this year?
Oh, everyone's super positive about that. I got my second cap at Del Diamond. It is a beautiful place to play rugby. It's a wonderful field. Locker rooms will be some of the best facilities in the league. I've seen most of the stadiums that people play at, that most of the teams play at, and Del Diamond is an absolutely wonderful facility. There's nothing I probably missed more while I was hurt than playing rugby in front of, 5,000, 10,000. I believe when I played Ireland, we played in front of 25,000 people. That's the kind of stakes that you want to play rugby. You want to be playing rugby in front of that many people. You want to be playing rugby in big stadiums, because there's no other feeling like it. I haven't had anything that really matches that as an experience. And I'm glad that we now have a home field that will give us that experience.
You said that's a big positive. Pretty soon you'll have played both pro and MLR. So for the players who have experienced both, what's the vibe like right now with MLR? Does it feel like it's heading in the right direction?
Yes. Everything's handled so professionally. Like, all our dealings with the league are very crisp. They're very clear with what they want from us. All our dealings with the team are very good as well. We get a lot of good. All the communication lines are so much better than they were in pro, simply because we can actually communicate. Like, it was very difficult to communicate just because there was 1 or 2 guys running a whole league, versus now there's actual infrastructure in place that allows it to operate in a more professional way. So it's definitely, and it's gotten better this year from last year, and it was pretty good last year in comparison.
So that's definitely a positive, and certainly from the outsider's perspective, it looks a lot better, almost night and day, really. I mean, the fact that we're even seeing, season 2, was that,
Yes.
Was that kind of gutting when you found out the pro wasn't going to continue at the time?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a horrible feeling, honestly. Like, I had put my whole life into becoming, like, getting that first professional contract wherever it came, even if it was, it's Columbus, Ohio. I was just so happy to be a professional rugby player. Like, that's what I'd wanted to be since I started playing rugby when I was 15, 14. And it was a horrible experience, but that was tempered by right when I got that email, I got the other email that I was selected for my first ARC tour. So it could have been worse, I suppose.
Well, you made it through the rapids, as it were. So you actually grew up in Florida. Do you think a team could survive there, an MLR team?
It depends on where they do it and how they market it. Florida is a very fun-loving environment, so you'd have to market it as a real party spot. I think if you put it in Miami, there's a lot of good rugby culture in Miami. It would just be so expensive, cost of living wise, to do it down there. It's already harder to do that in the higher expense markets. I think there's a community down there to support it, but it would be logistically difficult.
So maybe this team that's coming into Atlanta next year is a better starting point to see how things go.
Yeah, I think that's a very good place for a rugby team, and with the direct line they'll have to the belt of talent that is Life University, they're going to have a real serious squad, I think, from the get-go.
It'll be interesting when they come in. We've got the 2 Texas teams, talk of maybe Dallas as well. Then you've got New Orleans and you've got Atlanta, all kind of down there on that southern line. So be some new rivalries for sure. And of course, as you say, lots of guys will have played with and against some of those Life guys all through their collegiate career. So looking at these seasons, you've got 5 home games to start. 7 of the first 9 games actually are in Texas. So does the team have a specific number of wins in mind, or is it just kind of one game at a time?
We have some goals as a team that we certainly would like to hit in those first 5 home games. I'm not really going to get into team goals that are discussed within the team in an interview, man. I'm sorry. But, I mean, obviously your goal is to go into every single game saying that we're going to win, especially at home. With the amount of travel you're going to do in this league, it's going to be hard to win it. It's going to be even harder to win away. So it's extremely important that we pull a couple of wins out here in these first 5 home games.
So I'm going to put you on the spot now before I let you go. Prediction time. Let's assume Austin makes it to the semifinals. Who's your pick for the other 3 teams?
I would go Seattle, Glendale, and NOLA.
All right. Well, we'll see how you do. So thanks again for giving us your time. Much appreciated. Best of luck with the recovery. I'm excited to see Peter Malcolm version 2.0 soon in MLR. So and try to keep those Canadians out of trouble down there.
I will do so, man. Thanks for having me on.
Peter Malcolm, Austin Elite and U.S. Eagles hooker. You can find him on Instagram at Pete'sJam8, as in the number 8. Hopefully he'll be back sooner than later. So right about now is usually when I throw to our own Paul Tate, but he is currently fighting the forces of darkness in South America, or, possibly in hiding or something. I don't know. But hopefully we'll have him back soon, maybe in time for next week. But we're not done yet. We need to get a neutral party in here to talk about some of the overarching themes of the upcoming season. And I can't think of many people more qualified to talk about this stuff than my next guest. 10-time national champion as coach of the Penn State women's side, 2 World Cups coaching the women's Eagles, resident guru on the MLR Kickoff podcast with Dan Power, and now a regular in the commentary booth for MLR games, Mr. Pete Steinberg, coming at us from Colorado. Pete, thanks so much for giving us some of your time during this incredibly busy week. It's kind of the storm before the storm almost. We got Major League Rugby Season 2 coming up. It almost sounds like Season 2 of a sitcom or something when you say it like that. But so you're in Seattle this weekend for the Glendale, the big match there, the repeat of the final of last year. That's going to be incredibly exciting. Do you have a special watch that keeps track of the time zone that you're in?
I don't. I travel for work, and now I get to travel for rugby. One of the interesting things, and my wife and I had this discussion coming into this spring, is that when I retired from coaching after the 27 Women's World Cup, the idea was I was going to travel less, but then this opportunity with commentating for Major League Rugby popped up, and now I'm actually traveling more. So generally, it's sort of the bags under my eyes determine where I am most of the time.
Are you a big coffee drinker, or that 5-hour energy stuff? How do you keep going?
No, I'm a big coffee drinker, and one of the great pleasures of traveling is always finding the local coffee shop. So you always want to find, I can do a Starbucks and I can do a Pete's Coffee and that sort of stuff, but I love to find the local place that grinds its own coffee and roasts its own coffee kind of stuff. And I'm always on the search for a good cup of coffee, but that's generally what keeps me going.
That's funny. I was talking to Kate Zachary, of course, in the Women's Eagles, just in one of the earlier podcasts, and she was talking. I asked her about coffee. Apparently she's big into that. And she was saying how she likes to bring her own on these road trips and have this little coffee club. So that's interesting. Maybe something you've bestowed upon them. So obviously that the big focus this week is on MLR, but I would consider you one of the experts on women's rugby in the USA. So I thought I would be remiss if I didn't ask you at least a couple questions pertaining to that. There is a kind of a method to my madness here. I am leaning towards MLR. We've seen, collegiate standards rise. The Women's Eagles are consistently around the top 5 in both 7s and 15s in the world. England now has 28 full-time players. The Premier 15s over there is moving towards becoming fully professional. Obviously, I don't expect the USA to follow suit, anytime in the next few months. But, do you think there's any chance in the future we might see some kind of women's MLR, either just as, kind of semi-pro, amateur kind of sides built on the teams that we've seen already, or is it still a long ways away from that in the USA?
Well, I'd start by saying that Major League Rugby is probably a long way away from really being on a long-term footing. It's still a startup itself, but I do think there's value in creating something that has some semi-professional base. The challenge that we have in the US is that we don't have a lot of infrastructure. So even in the WPL, my view is that, I always think about, do we have clubs or do we have teams? And the way that the difference is the president of the team a current player. And if they're a current player, then it's not really a club. It's really just a team. And there are a few clubs that are run very well in the US, but probably not enough. And those clubs don't have much infrastructure. Outside of Glendale, I don't think there are any women's clubs that have a field and a stadium that they can play in. So I think we're a ways away from being semi-pro. I think what's actually going to happen is both the French league and the English league are going to have more money coming into it. We'll probably see some of the best players in the US start heading over there, a little bit like happens on the men's side. And what I would like to see is maybe, 10 years from now, Major League Rugby able to sort of begin to develop a women's program in conjunction with it. But I think we're a long way away. If you look at sort of the struggles that the women's soccer professional leagues have had in the States, and you imagine the millions of kids that play soccer and the exposure that they have, it's still something that isn't sustainable for them. So I think in the US, I think we're a ways away.
On the coaching front, we've seen one of your World Cup players, Tiffany Fahey, being signed as a coach by New York. Was that a surprise to you? Do you think there's a chance we'll see more of that in the future? MLR teams kind of casting their net a little wider and looking for, talented women coaches, or just anybody, I guess, who's got the qualifications?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer in mixed coaching staff. So when I coached the Mid-Atlantic men, I always had at least one woman assistant coach. I think that there's value to that. I know that James English was part of the women's pathway when I was the Eagles coach, and I think that's how we came across Tiffany. I think Tiffany has a huge amount of value. I think what's most exciting about the game in the US is not just in Major League Rugby, but in the collegiate game, there are now professional coaching pathways for former players. And so you can see the recent generation of retired players that have stepped into those collegiate ranks, like a Farrah Douglas or a Mel Denham. These are people, or Stacey Bridges, who's still playing but is now a professional coach. I think that's one of the most exciting developments. I would like to see more Major League Rugby teams adopt a more progressive attitude, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, interesting. I'm very keen to see how that moves along. Really great for her. Also, we're going to see Haley Slaughter, I think, refereeing one of the games this year. So certainly we're seeing some women start to sneak in there. And of course, they're such big supporters, of the game. So it just seems strange that we've kind of underdeveloped, I think, women's rugby in North America overall. But, you touched
I think, sorry, just one thing, Brian. I think what's interesting is that there are probably more coaching positions, full-time professional coaching positions in the women's game than there is in the men's game in the US. And I think that's one of the things that, maybe with Major League Rugby and more expanded coaching staffs, as that expands, that's going to change. But if you actually want to be a professional coach, having experience coaching women is the easiest way to do that. And I think those professional roles are going to continue to grow in the college game. So that's going to be one of the interesting things that we need to watch as the game at that level continues to develop.
Now, we've seen, speaking of the connections with collegiate rugby, we've seen a number of All-Americans jump into MLR squads this year. Certainly New Orleans has been very progressive in that regard. Some other teams maybe not as much. We're going to be expanding pretty soon. Next season, we got Atlanta, Boston, Washington, D.C., maybe Dallas. So there could be 13, 14 teams really soon within a year or two, assuming this all moves ahead as kind of planned. How much are we going to need these college players to step up? I mean, what kind of a role does collegiate rugby really play in developing the players for Major League Rugby?
Oh, I mean, I think it has to be critical. I mean, it's the American pathway. And I think that it's Major League Rugby's timing is good, because I think if you look around the collegiate landscape, you see more and more programs able to provide sort of this daily training environment that's really high performance. I mean, I know at Penn State, it's where I coached for a long time. They're there. They've got nutritionists. They're in the weight room 3 or 4 times a week. They've got a full-time professional coaching staff. You can see that at Lindenwood and at Life. Like, if you go back even 5 years ago, you would look at Cal Berkeley and say, well, they're probably they're the one team. But now there's 10, 15 teams. And there are even these small colleges. I mean, one of the interesting developments is rugby is becoming useful for admissions. So places like Lindenwood use rugby to attract new students to their campus, because in the US, the population of students is dropping. And so I think you're going to see more and more varsity programs. And I think it's going to be critical. I mean, there's a big sort of wringing of their hands of the quality of players that are out there and whether they can step up. I think those players are there. I think it's going to be a little rough. I think, it's going to be a challenge. I think that the competitive balance that we saw in the first season is not going to be true in the second season. I think there will be some teams that do struggle, and that's partly due to the playing base. But I think the college development is already on a path to be able to become that feeder. And I think that's going to be really critical. And, you see teams developing their academies that will also be able to feed in. And I actually think the ideal is when these teams can partner with universities that can provide both the high-level environment and the quality education. And in those partnerships, we'll be able to feed their teams in the future.
Is there a decision? We're not quite there yet financially, but is there a decision for some of these players, to make? We've seen, for instance, Mason Peterson really jumped into professional rugby at a very early age, leaving that collegiate environment. Is there a decision for these guys early on in their careers, maybe after 1 or 2 years of college, to actually jump to MLR if they really think they're going to be a professional rugby player? Is there an advantage to getting in that earlier rather than staying in the collegiate program?
So I think that so a lot of that depends on where you are, right? And so there are a lot of players that pick up the game in college that might be in programs that are still very much in the club sports ethos. Maybe they have a coach, maybe they don't have a coach. You've got some players, they pick up, they were good athletes, they may have been cut from a varsity sport, and they want to play high-level rugby. That's the guy that may end up saying, you know what, I'm not getting what I need to develop here, so I'm going to go to a Major League Rugby team. But if you're at Cal Berkeley, or if you're at a Life, or you're at a Penn State, or one of the Ivy League schools like Dartmouth, I mean, you're getting the development that you need, and you're getting the education, which is really critical. The money's not worth it for you to jump. So I think as long as you're getting, as an athlete and as a player, the development you need, my advice would be to stay where you are. But there will be some players that come from programs that don't have that support. And for them to not be left behind, or to not miss the window, right, that happens when you're 22 or 23, Major League Rugby might be an attractive option for them.
So the import rule they've got right now, we've got 10 import cards are handed out to each team, and it's an interesting system they've got. They can trade these cards. They can, for instance, Austin is going to have 13 import cards this year. They've acquired a couple from other teams. They made a trade last year with Pakiafu, sending him to Utah, and they got one. So, but there's 90 import cards across to fill in this. Do you think that number is about right? Do you think the prevalence of import players takes away from the league at all, or is this just kind of a necessary evil to build up that standard of play while we build up the collegiate feeder system?
Well, so I think there's a couple of really interesting thoughts about this, because, I think it's interesting that we talk about bringing in professional players from overseas as a negative, like in the long term. So, and I think that's because there's this focus that the goal of Major League Rugby is to create a winning USA or Canadian national team. And, to me, that's a really interesting question. Now, I certainly think that the national teams will become more competitive and will become better because there's a professional league. But it's not clear to me that so if you said, well, we need foreigners to come in, non-qualified players to come in and play, or we cannot have that and the league isn't going to grow. What choice would you make? And so I think there's enough space for 10. 10 seems to be the right number for me. I mean, if you think about, you've got squads of sort of somewhere around 35 to 45. You've got 10 players. If you think about your 23s, and I think there's still enough to go there. I think what to me is more interesting is to let the economics drive it. In other words, it's going to be cheaper for you to be able to develop your athletes locally, to build relationships with universities, so those players come to you, than it is to get overseas players. And so therefore, I think that you could actually just say, let the economics drive it, and it would be, I think it would work out. I think 10 is fine. I think as we continue, we might need to have, either expand that, or at least let the expansion teams have some extra foreign players. We don't yet have the quality of the players that we need in the US. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is actually, most 22-year-olds when they come out from college are not good enough to play in Major League Rugby, even though they could be, because the collegiate game is not competitive enough. I mean, if you play for Life University, there's probably one game a year that you're actually not sure if you're going to win, right? That's it. And so the question is, how do we take that 22-year-old and how do we give them the experiences that allow them to develop, so we don't need as many foreign players in the future? And I don't know that we have an answer to that. I mean, Houston obviously has developed the West Houston team, and there's the Seattle Saracens, and there's OMBAC and in San Diego, and so some of these teams are there. But is that Division I going to be enough to really bridge it for those 22 or 23-year-olds? I don't think it is. And so that's going to be an interesting question to be able to fill those slots in the future.
I was talking to Peter Malcolm earlier about last year we saw kind of the dearth of really quality front row players, and we've seen a lot of imports come in there. But I think for me, the biggest spot is the number 10, our fly half situation. Really, there's no first choice U.S. born fly halves across the league. You know, Ben Seaman was born in Argentina, Will McGee, England, JP Eloff is South African. You know, we'll see if Will Holder might be the only guy who gets a start wherever he ends up. We're not quite sure which team he's going to be on yet, or maybe, even Nick Feeks, the All-American down at NOLA, is Australian. So, there's 3 New Zealanders at Utah. Obviously, we have to bring these players in from somewhere. Being a halfback yourself, why is it so difficult to find these players in American rugby?
Oh, I think it's all about picking up the game early and then having. I think the biggest challenge we have in US rugby is that at every level we don't have competitive competitions. I would say on average, the American rugby player steps onto the field and knows if they're going to win or lose 80% of the time. And so when you look at a position as critical as fly half, you say, well, if I know that we're going to win, then I am not tactically tested, right? And we see this in the US by the lack of real quality kicking fly halves, right? There's a real challenge where we don't develop kickers. And it's not that they can't kick. All of these guys played soccer growing up. It's actually because they don't have to kick. Either they're down by either they're up by 40 points or down by 40 points. And so having a kicking game doesn't help you win in most of the games. So I think the challenge that we have is we don't put our players in a high pressure competitive environment where their skills get tested, where they have to use all of the skills they have. And that's why you might see players grow up playing 10, but when they get to that next level, they end up moving to 12 or to 15, because when they, even though we've started now picking up the game at 11 and 12, right, or some even younger, they're not playing in the environments that require them to develop the all-round skills as 10. So I still think we're a ways away from creating some domestic 10s.
Another aspect to the import thing is the officials, the match officials. And of course, you've done a bit of refereeing recently as well yourself. Last year we saw I think there was mixed reviews on the officials. I think for the most part they were okay. But this year we're going to see quite a few coming over on exchange. Last year we had Adam Leal coming over from the RFU. This year we got, for instance, Ben Krause coming in from South Africa. How important is to get that standard of officiating up as well as the level of play?
Well, so I think this is one of those really interesting questions, which goes back to what's for the long-term benefit of the league, what needs to be true. And what needs to be true this year is we need an exciting game that the non-rugby fan will enjoy watching. So, sometimes if you watch the Premiership, I would not describe it as, especially in sort of this time of year in the Januaries and Decembers in the UK, you would not call it an exciting game that a non-rugby fan wants to see. So I'm actually less concerned about the quality of play, and I'm more concerned about the game being open and concerned that the officials do not decide the outcome. Right. I think we should have the same view of the officials as we do as the players, which is some of these guys are in development, the league's in development. We should, have some empathy for the role that they have. We should want to see them improve from game to game, just like we would for the players. But for me, as long as the officials are not deciding the outcome of the game, I'm going to be happy with it, because we don't want that to be the story. What I want is an American to turn on Major League Rugby, because they're probably just going to be scanning through their cable and they come to CBS Sports and they're like, wow, let me watch this a bit. And then at the end be like, wow, what an exciting, great, dynamic game. And if we can get there, then we can be successful. I mean, if you talk to anyone in the MLR, the challenge they have is that the rugby traditionalists do not want the same thing as the casual American rugby fan. And there aren't enough rugby traditionalists in North America for Major League Rugby to survive. So we have to be about explaining the game. We have to be about a dynamic game. We have to be about, getting the stories about the players right and all those sorts of things. So, I do have a concern about the officiating because I know that it's going to have an impact on the game. But I think, we have to see this as a startup and as long as they're improving and continuing to work on their game, I think we'll be fine.
Well, Pete, I could sit here and talk about a million different things with you all day, but I know you're a busy guy. You got things to do. So I'll leave this kind of an open question to end. Is there one aspect, production, the players, the teams, the new teams, anything? What is there any one thing that's coming up this season in particular that you're most looking forward to, kind of in our experiment season 2 coming up?
Well, I mean, I think first of all we should just recognize that we're about to, knock down a new barrier for North American rugby, right? So we are now at season 2 of a professional rugby league, which is a first. And so I think we should recognize that. The thing that's I think is going to be most interesting for me is to, and I always think about this as a coach, is to watch the teams and how they adjust throughout the season. I mean, you've got the Toronto Arrows who have 2 seasons, one where they're all away and one that they're all home, to be able to be aware of the teams traveling like long ways, how to manage that. It's a much longer season. I think watching how coaches handle that with player rotations, how they handle that with development of their approach to play. If we're really beginning to see teams adjust what they do relative to the opposition, I mean, to me, I'm looking for a new level of player management and approach to play, and that's what I'm most excited to see. So, we're going to start off with Seattle versus Glendale. They played each other 3 times last year. A lot of turnover in the Glendale team, not as much turnover in the Seattle team, but coaching turnover in the Seattle team. So to me, it's going to be really interesting to look and say, are we going to see a replica of last year, or are we going to see something new? And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see some innovation on the field as we see innovation off the field.
So many interesting storylines to follow this season. Well, thank you so much for your time, Pete. I know you've got to run, so we'll let you go, and hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up later on in the season and talk more about this stuff.
Absolutely, Brian. And for all of your listeners, I just have to say that the America's Rugby News site is the place that I go for my news on Major League Rugby. So anytime I can jump on your podcast, just ask.
Pete Steinberg, he's more of a Twitter guy, so you can find him there at PJ Rugby 9. He's worth a follow. Of course, also check out the MLR Kickoff podcast. There's a season preview episode that came out a couple days ago, and there should be another a weekend preview coming out later today. It might be out now. I'm not sure. I haven't checked. I should also give a shout out to Aaron Castro. He's the producer and chief malcontent of that show, also part of the Earful of Dirt podcast. That one's all about MLR on Monday nights. Check that one out for some entertainment. And you can listen to Pete's commentary on the CBS Sports Network Game of the Week on Sunday. The Seattle Seawolves versus the Glendale Raptors. What a game that is going to be. I can't wait to see how Glendale deals with the Seattle scrum this year. They had some real problems with that last year, so we'll see what happens there. And by the way, some of you may be wondering what I was alluding to on Twitter earlier. Seattle has another interesting situation this season. Anton Moolman was supposed to come in from South Africa to be their head coach. His visa has been rejected. So you think I'm going to say Phil Mack again, but no. They have somehow come up with a replacement on short notice. Richie Walker, the former USA Women's Sevens head coach, he's been with Atavas for a long time. He is going to step up and take over the head coach role. Now, I don't know the specifics of why Anton's visa didn't go through, but we all know the predicament that the USA government is in right now. So, let's hope they sort that out soon. I'm hearing there's some other visa problems with some players going on right now too. So, kind of a frustrating time, but certainly wish Richie all the best there in Seattle, and really great news that he is stepping up there. Toronto versus New Orleans on Saturday to start things off. This will be broadcast on Game TV in Canada. I've had lots of people ask if it will be streamed as well, and I can tell you that it will, and you can find that streaming link on the Arrows Facebook page. And some other news for you. I found out this morning that there will be an MLR team that is not Toronto with a Canadian captain. And that team is the NOLA Gold. Eric Howard has officially been named captain for the season, the Canada hooker. Congrats to him. I'll have to try and get him on here at some point during this season. That's great to hear. Again, for Canadian fans, you will tune in there. Hubert Biden's also down there. Kyle Bailey playing for them. Saturday evening, Peter Malcolm won't be on the field, but Austin Elite will be hosting the Houston SaberCats in their first big Texas derby of the campaign. That will be on Facebook as well. Austin with a couple of Uruguayans who will probably debut, Andres Villaseca and Juan Echeverria. Houston will be without three Uruguayan forwards, but they're on ARC duty right now. But scrum half Santiago Arata will be playing, and he's my preseason pick as the top scrum half in MLR this season, so definitely check that one out. Sunday, another page is written in the history books. Rugby United New York travels to San Diego to play the Legion at Torero Stadium, the first official MLR game for New York. Will Ben Foden be suiting up? We will see. And a quick word on one who won't be. I'm sad to say that Seamus Kelly will no longer be playing for New York this season. The former Eagles World Cup center has been forced to retire with a back injury, and that's a real shame. But it opens an opportunity maybe for Samu Smith, a very exciting young prospect who's come in. But yes, very sad news about Seamus Kelly coming through New York. I'm expecting some kind of an official announcement for them imminently. And one last word. This one goes out to all the MLR teams who may or may not be listening. Please get your team lists out on time. Tomorrow morning, that's Friday, would be just lovely. I'm going to make it my mission this season to be a pain in the backside for teams who are slacking in the communications department. And there are a couple already. So throw us a bone, folks, for everybody's sanity. Get us those team lists as on time, early, so we can talk about these games and really build the hype for this season. Please. There you go. That's it for me. Job done. Major League Rugby Season 2 coming at you. I'm Brian Ray, America's Rugby News Forever. Enjoy your rugby weekend.